Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special meeting of the Brisbane City Council, January 24th, 2017. And prior to this, we did hold a study session, which was televised. Thank you to those of you who could attend. It's on the same topic as tonight's agenda. So at this time, we'll call the meeting to order. And would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Please note for the record that all council members are present.
Thank you. Adoption of the agenda.
Move adoption.
I'd like to make a change to the agenda and add in close in memory of Luigi Bussi.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Move adoption with that amendment.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have an agenda. Item 4, continued public hearing. Item A, Brisbane Baylands planning applications, Baylands concept plans, Brisbane Baylands specific plan, case SP 01-06, general plan amendment, cases GP 0106/GP 0110, and related final environmental impact report. Specific topics include traffic, noise, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and related policy issues. Universal Paragon Corporation, applicant, owners various, APN various. Okay, so at this point, we'll take a staff report, please.
Yes, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Steve Crosley and Lloyd Zola, our consultants on this matter.
Okay, good evening, Mayor, good evening, Council. I'm going to give a little refresher of the transportation analysis that was performed for the Baylands draft EIR. And then Lloyd will follow up with noise and GHG impacts. So for the EIR, it was traffic and circulation, but analyzed impacts not only for traffic, but also impacts to transit, and also looking at non-motorized impacts as well, impacts to pedestrians and bicycles, and improvements we made there. For the traffic specifically, and this is per CEQA, we looked at in existing conditions, setting the stage for what is currently out there on the roadway today. Existing plus project, those are conditions. If the project was built today, or as of when the existing conditions was created, and that was 2010, the year 2010 for that. So that's impacts of the project specifically on top of the existing transportation network. The cumulative without project, that fast forwards to 2030, and we use modeling to develop forecasts for 2030, and that is without the project, the cumulative without project. The last scenario is going to be the cumulative with project, and essentially that's the 2030 conditions, as we were talking about earlier in the study session, with the project in place in 2030. And those impacts for all modes were analyzed for all the different scenarios, so the 4 different development scenarios for the project. And these are the original development scenarios for the project with the full build-out, up housing or retail, et cetera, for all the different. For this traffic study portion of it, we looked at 18 total intersections. A lot of them matched up with the Candlestick Point, Hunters Point EIR that was released in 2009. And this looks at, since Brisbane is essentially self-contained with points down at entry onto the 101 freeway at Bayshore, out to Geneva, most of these intersections that were studied are within the city of Brisbane, but if you fall outside the city in Daly City or in San Francisco, and 18 total intersections were studied. For the future cumulative analysis, we did assume specific roadway interchange improvements. Those are a little harder to read, but they're down there. And since this was 2030 and we were assuming a wide range of improvements, we did assume the Geneva extension. We assumed the Candlestick Point interchange. We also assumed some improvements along Bayshore Boulevard, and then improvements at the Sierra Point 101 interchange as well. Those are all in the EIR. If there's a specific question, I can definitely answer any of those improvements that were assumed.
All right, and then also our frontage road along 101.
Pardon?
frontage road along 101.
Frontage road along 101, of course, absolutely. So, in addition to the roadway improvements, we also assumed certain transit improvements to the project, or what we could assume when we built the project to help analyze what those transit impacts were. Some of these, that's the only one there. We assumed some reconfiguration of the Caltrain station to accommodate bus rapid transit on Geneva Harney. Actually, I think there were a couple other bullets on this presentation, but the Geneva Harney BRT project, that was assumed as a baseline condition. The Geneva extension as a conduit for the Geneva Harney BRT was assumed, and also the Caltrain station was modified to better access the Geneva Harney BRT. The other improvement that was assumed in this study was the extension of the T3 line, and that would continue into Schlage Lock and loop to the Bayshore Caltrain station.
Steve, can you give the BRT for the public, please?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So BRT is Bus Rapid Transit. There are currently 3 routes being planned in San Francisco. The first one is a Van Ness Bus Rapid Transit. Geary is the second Bus Rapid Transit line in San Francisco. And Geneva Harney would be the 3rd Bus Rapid Transit line, which would provide the east-west connectivity through the southern portion of San Francisco and northern San Mateo County.
Okay, so Steve, before you move on to the next slide, so I know you don't have the other bullet points. So you're saying that the station was assumed that it would move closer to the BRT line, which, excuse me, would be along Geneva.
Yes, that is correct. So, we began this process. The EIR itself was begun in 2007. There were a bunch of pauses along the way, but we really began this process in 2011 and 2012 using the best information that we had at that time. The Geneva extension was assumed as a future condition, and the Candlestick Point, Hunters Point EIR, the Geneva Harney BRT is a signature project of that development, and so the assumption, therefore, was to continue along Geneva Avenue. That specifically had not been figured out at that point in time, but the assumption was to put Geneva Harney on Geneva Avenue. The study that looked at the Bayshore Intermodal Station study, the one that looked at how you could reconfigure the station itself to better match up with Geneva Harney interchange, I think it believed it looked at moving it a bit south, maybe 150 feet, 200 feet south, to better match up with the Geneva.
Not connecting it though.
Well, since Geneva actually would be go over the Caltrain tracks, you'd actually have to have a vertical connection down to the Caltrain tracks. What we have actually found, and I just want to point this out, that whether the station stays where it is, whether it moves 150 feet south, we don't think it can move north right now. But I think that small a distance for what we're looking at in terms of a wholly new bus rapid transit line in the southern portion of San Francisco County, northern San Mateo County, that 150 feet is not going to make any substantial difference in the actual transit usage. But we did assume that we assumed the Bayshore Intermodal Station improvements as part of this study, which does include that small, minute move of the station.
Okay.
Even though today there may not be the same understanding of what's going to happen with that station.
But
Okay, if I unless you got something.
I wanted to follow up on that. The Bayshore or the Hunters Point project is underway currently, but the Geneva Harney bus transit is not in place.
It is not in place yet. I believe they're looking probably for around a 2023 timeframe for that 2022, 2023. I'd have to defer to SF and MTI on that. I do know that they have finished their pre-environmental portion of that work. They're going to be moving into environmental and design. I think that the big challenge for the Geneva Harney project is what happens once you go from basically between Bayshore and Blanken across 101 through Little Hollywood, and that little piece just has not yet quite been figured out. They have different alignments they're looking at, but the project is going to go forward. There is a substantial need for that project. Just that little last bit of the alignment has yet to be figured out.
And okay, thank you. Then I'll defer back to you on that.
Is it on now? Okay. I wanted to follow up on that too.
Good, no, it's all good.
Just get right into it
That's
tonight.
what it's supposed to be about.
Can you dive into a little bit more about that? Because I was reading about it. There was like 150 feet and a 300 feet. I'm thinking like the amount of money that it would cost to move a station, just in general, let alone like why all that effort to move something 150 feet? I don't know. Can you where is this coming from?
I think what we'd have to do is actually just go back and look at the rationale inside that Bayshore Intermodal Station study. So there's the bi-county study, also done by the TA, and then following that was the Bayshore Intermodal Station study, which did recommend this move south. It was to better connect the station platform with what will be an elevated connection to the Geneva extension. And so, again, I don't think that it necessarily is it is something that has to happen to make sure that we have transit use that matches up with our expectations. I mean, that 150 feet is probably not going to make a substantial difference.
Because to me, it makes more sense to develop the thing that isn't there yet to be closer to the existing station than moving like the existing.
Yeah, well,
150. That's just
I think there were a lot of other nuances involved in that. The Schlegel Lock plan, I think, is slightly different today than it was back in that point in time. There was also an assumption that SFMTA or Muni was going to extend a T-third into the Schlegel Lock development, and that possibly could have resulted in that shift of the station moving south to better loop the T-third off of Bayshore and Sunnydale.
Okay.
I don't know exactly. We probably could look into that. We could figure that out. But in terms of how the magnitude of overall transit ridership, is 150 feet really going to make a difference? No, it's not.
It just seemed like, wow, for 150
and
feet.
Yeah, and there's a long sordid history with that station, whether it goes north, whether it goes south, whether it stays in the same spot. And I need to say a little agnostic on that, but I know there's been a lot of discussion about that station.
It was moved north about 20 years ago for baby bullet rationale, which was a request from, at the time, a state legislature.
Yeah, and then the other thing was you mentioned the 3rd Street Light Rail terminating or going into the Slade Lock site. So there was no study of connecting it to the multimodal station?
Oh, it was connecting to the multimodal station. So when I say Schlegel Lock, I mean, so the Bayshore station is essentially abutting, obviously, the Schlegel Lock development for a portion of it. So the original concept, or the concept back in 2010, 2011, 2012, was to extend the Muni T-third from its current terminus and have a loop around so it would actually connect directly to the Caltrain station. Okay. And my understanding is that is not on the table today, but again, this is, fast forwarding, going back 5 years and forward 5 years.
Not to delay your presentation, we can talk about
it. Oh, no, that's
later
okay.
On.
We can, absolutely. So those were the transit improvements. And again, that's what I wanted to point out was that, when we did this study, the transit improvements that we assumed were the best information that we had at that specific point in time.
And we don't feel that the EIR would be better served by having current what is feasible now?
I do not think that it would make a substantial difference. I think the key drivers of transit ridership are going to be the Caltrain station itself, and it's going to be close enough to the majority of the Baylands development that I think that's the major driver. Geneva-Harney BRT is also going to be a major driver. I think just figuring out exactly where they slot in and whether it's 150 feet to the north, 150 feet to the south, I think that is somewhat inconsequential to the overall magnitude of what regional transit opportunities there are actually at the site.
But the Geneva extension plays a huge role in the traffic assumptions and the 101 interchange for Geneva, correct?
For the traffic assumptions, absolutely, yes, absolutely. Geneva extension.
And that's still not, it's an assumption, but it's not a reality.
It is not. As you mentioned, it is not. It's not a funded or an approved project yet. It's in the regional transportation plan, but it's not a funded project yet.
Okay, thank you.
I'm close to being done, but I'm happy to answer more questions. Jumping around a little bit, so we just talked about what the roadway improvements were. We talked about what the transit improvements were. I think one other thing I want to point out was important is how we did trip generation for this project. Now, the trip generation is different than trip generation for other developments that may be only one single land use. So for this project, since the Baylands, especially under the DSP scenario, but also under the CPP scenarios, will have a wide variety of mix of uses. And so I'm happy to answer any questions on how we develop trip generation, but wanted to point out that if you took standard Institute of Transportation engineer rates and just added them up for every individual land use, it would actually be higher than we actually projected for in the study itself or for the project itself. And the rationale for that is we're actually taking credits for internal capture, which is trips that stay within the development itself and don't go to the external network. We also have taken credits for transit usage and also some minor, lesser credits for pedestrian and bicycle for non-motorized modes. So what you're seeing up there on the screen tonight is that, and this is a peer-reviewed study the EPA currently uses called mixed-use trip generation methodologies. We were able to reduce the vehicle trip making in the DSP and DSPV scenarios by more than we were able to reduce in the CPP and CPP scenarios, primarily because there was housing involved, and we have more internal capture with housing than we do with just retail or office development. So I don't want to belabor that point, but the trip generation, happy to answer any questions on that if there are any lingering questions on how we did that work.
Can you explain a little what you mean by internal capture?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So the internal capture is documented if we have so Brisbane Baylands, so say take a step back, Brisbane Baylands is going to have a lot of internal intersections, but those intersections are yet to be built, so we're not environmentally impacting intersections within a development that hasn't been built. But within that large development, you have housing, you have retail, you have office, and a lot of those trips, if someone could be even driving from their house to a retail establishment, if they're within the actual project site itself, then they're not being pushed out onto the external network, and they're not going to degrade the external network. And so we call that internal capture or internalization of trips. Is that
Yes.
Is that being a
And you had said that with residential that it's decreased?
Actually, in the DSP scenario, we actually have a bit more internal capture because we have more interaction.
Or more internal capture.
We have more internal capture because we have more interaction of different types of uses. So in the DSP scenario, you have housing, which then can have internal trips between that and work, that and retail, that and entertainment. In the CPP scenarios, you still have some internal capture, but it's mainly people going from office to retail and back and forth. So we have a bit more in the DSP scenario. We have a bit. We're able to reduce our external trip making more magnitude in the DSP scenario than in the CPP scenario.
Thank you.
And just for the public, can
Yes.
explain those acronyms, DSP?
Oh, sorry, that's the developer sponsored plan and the community preferred plan.
Okay.
Specific plan, isn't it?
Sorry. Preferred plan, community proposed plan. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
On that same slide, the non-home-based trips is 39%,
Yes.
meaning that everyone who leaves one area for somewhere else, 39% are going somewhere else?
So yes, in that instance, it'd be 39% of non-home based trips. So it's essentially if you were working at an office or working at the research development facility and you wanted to go to lunch or do other shopping, we're estimating that 39% of those trips that are within development that are not beginning or ending at a home would be internally captured within that development. 61% then would be pushed out to the external roadway network.
Okay.
I see you're not quite. Maybe I could explain that a little bit more. So, the trip making. So what we have up there is home-based trips. So home-based work trips is going from house to your work. Home-based other trips would be home-based to shopping or school or restaurants. And the non-home-based trips are everything else that doesn't have a trip end at someone's home. And within the overall Baylands development envelope, we could capture 39% of all trips that are not home-based. We can capture them internally and not put them out to the external network. That is the same for all scenarios, so it's the same for DSP and for the CPP scenario. I think I'm just about done. I thought this was actually at the front of the presentation, but just wanted to point out that the Brisbane level service standards, and I think we were talking about this, Councilman Davis, is that for the most part it's level service D throughout the city of Brisbane. There's 2 instances where it is level service C instead of level service D. That's at Bayshore Boulevard and Old County Road. and also Bayshore and San Bruno Avenue. And so that is what we're striving to achieve when we analyze the traffic generated by the project and how the project would affect the external roadway network. So jumping to, I actually thought I had existing conditions, but just jumping to the cumulative traffic. So this is 2030, and this is without projects. So this is 2030 with all of the other developments that are scheduled to be completed in the area, which includes Candlestick Point, Hunters Point, the redo of Executive Park, the Schlegel Lock, the Sunnydale Hope SF. What we're projecting here is that out of these 18 intersections that we studied, that 12 of them would actually have a deficient level of service in 2030 without Brisbane Baylands. And then we went on to do the with project analysis, and we actually found there were a few more intersections that were made deficient. What we're showing there is that only 2 intersections were actually go from acceptable level of service to deficient level of service just because of the Brisbane Baylands project in the future. But as you can see, that there are a lot of either deficient intersections operating in 2030 based upon these projections, and a number of those intersections and locations were impacted by the project, and we developed mitigation measures for those where feasible. I also wanted to point out that I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we analyze impacts to transit. We also analyze impacts to pedestrians and bicycles. There actually are some mitigation measures in the EIR just for pedestrian and ensuring better pedestrian connectivity and bicycle connectivity throughout the project. Impacts to transit service. Wanted to point out that the project is so large in terms of what we were looking at in trip generation that we actually projected to have, I think it's in the range of about 10,000 transit trips per day for the project, or a bit more. That's just because of the overall magnitude of overall trip making. So it actually is quite a big number, but it makes sense when we look at the overall magnitude of trip making by this project. So BART itself, we found that since BART is over, the closest station would be Balboa Park BART, and the easiest way to get there would be the Geneva Harney BRT line. Our projections are actually that while we will be adding a lot of trips to BART, it still is less than 2% of the total increase in ridership, just because BART itself is over 400,000 boardings per day, and so we can actually add some trips to BART, but without triggering more of a 2% increase in overall ridership. Caltrain is another case. Caltrain, I believe we had projected thousands of trips on Caltrain just because it is proximate, accessible, and it makes a lot of sense for the development itself to be centered around the Caltrain station.
Was there any number projected for increased ridership through Caltrain?
I have the EIR back there. I can find that out for you. I can show you what those projections are.
Okay.
6,000 and 10,000.
6,000.
6,000 to 10,000.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
And Caltrain right now only operates 1 train per hour per direction at the Bayshore station. Obviously, this would necessitate changes to Caltrain's operations. Obviously, they are able to make those decisions, make those changes, but the EIR did point out that its development went through that at some point, chicken or the egg type situation, something would have to happen and more service would have to be provided at the station to meet that demand. In terms of Muni, there are a whole host of San Francisco Muni routes that operate in the Baylands vicinity, and we looked at different screen lines to estimate what that additional capacity could be. We did exceed Muni's 85% capacity, I believe, on 2 screen lines, and there are mitigation measures. We actually talked about this in the study session in terms of what a fair share contribution could be for SFMTA. In terms of Santrams, there's only one effective route operating up and down Bayshore Boulevard, and I believe we projected just about 1% of trips on Samtrans, which resulted in no impact to Samtrans. But do want to point out that the EIR did find Caltrain and Muni to be impacted and recommended mitigation measures for both of those services. Just wanted to reiterate then what we looked at in terms of the roadway improvements. All of the feasible mitigation measures we constructed prior to any occupancy. And the goal of the mitigation measures, or the directive of the mitigation measures, is to reduce those impacts to a level below significance, which would be the level of service standard, level of service D, with the exception of those two locations, but throughout the entire city of Brisbane. The Geneva Avenue extension and the interchange improvements were assumed as part of the study. The cumulative scenario did include a scenario without the Geneva extension as well, just to see what could happen if we didn't have that extension. But the overall impacts and the impact analysis was predicated on the Geneva Avenue extension being in place for the use of Brisbane Baylands and other traffic. We touched on this a bit before, but there are a number of locations in the city of San Francisco and the city of Daly City that were impacted, where we identified feasible mitigations. They were determined to be significant and unavoidable because they are outside the city of Brisbane, and Brisbane, as a lead agency, is unable to force the improvements to happen. And so, therefore, while they are feasible and while we have identified them for those impacts currently outside San Francisco and Daly City, they're determined currently to be significant and unavoidable. Not necessarily not implementable, but currently significant and unavoidable. We also looked at impacts on US 101. I think everyone knows what the freeway is like during rush hour, especially in the PM. There's no opportunity to expand 101 currently, so while impacts were identified, there was no mitigation that was actually proposed. This is in contrast to mitigation we proposed for actual roadway improvements, but because we're unable to widen US 101, there were no feasible mitigations. I know that there's currently some managed lane studies going on throughout the Bay Area, but as far as road widening or any physical improvements, nothing is currently available to be done on 101. And then lastly, as part of this presentation, just in terms of, we know how important this site is going to be for transit use and how could we enhance and improve transit use at the site because of this development. Literature shows just how much more transit use is when it's proximate to a station. It's typically a quarter mile for bus and up to a half a mile for rail. So we're looking at basically anything within that third mile to a half mile, preferably a quarter mile to a third mile. The more development that can be implemented closer to the station, the more transit, the more usage you will get out of Caltrain and also out of Geneva-Harney BRT, because obviously we're looking at most of the transit provision is in the northwestern portion of the Baylands and even to its north. The other piece that was required for transit mitigation was the shuttles around the site itself. So other areas that are more than a half a mile, there would be shuttles that be provided. First mile, we call them first mile, last mile shuttles, similar to what you see operating in and out of a lot of the Caltrain stations. There's a couple shuttles currently operating out of the Bayshore station, but maybe something like the Millbrae station would be a good example of shuttles coming very frequently to pick people up and drop people off. And that would be a provision for the Baylands as well, a first mile, last mile shuttle through the less transit-oriented areas of the development. And I believe that is my traffic transportation presentation, and obviously happy to answer any more questions or take it at the end.
Any questions from?
Well, how does the council want to do this? When we have these different subject matters, do we want to do it all the questions at one time or break it up?
I think it makes sense to do it by topic while it's fresh in our heads, at least from the council questions. I do have a number of slips, and I know we have a large crowd here tonight, so I want to get to the public comment period.
Well,
Addison?
I haven't my questions written down on the pages that they're on, so I can reference the material, but I don't have them broken out yet. So I won't go first then, so I can figure out which pages are for which topic.
Okay.
Because I have them all together.
Clark?
So just go through all the presentations and then let the council do. I've asked my stuff already, actually. So
Perhaps if we let the council ask staff questions on transportation and then public
On
comment
transportation, right.
on transportation.
I think that makes
And then
sense.
we go to greenhouse gases. Otherwise, we're going to be getting a lot of things that
Yeah,
I think there'll still be some commingled subjects
Yeah,
that, address more than one topic, but perhaps that would be,
I like that idea.
Sorry, I'm not mic'd.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because we're all, we've just heard this presentation, so would you like to start with questions?
Yeah, no, we can do that. And should we start with the public asking questions first, or should it be the council? What do you guys think?
Well, we had, with the study session, had some of our questions, discussed already, so maybe you and Laurie, who missed the study session, would want to get those questions out there so staff might be able to answer them.
Sure. Why don't you start?
All right, sure. And first of all, I just want to apologize for being a little bit tardy to tonight's meeting. I was in Arizona. I just flew back this evening, and I also don't like not being at the study session, because that is something that I was pushing for, and here I wasn't at the study session. So, but I had planned that trip prior to when we had designated this particular meeting and the study session. So, all right. So let's start then. Okay, on page 2. So, you talked about the level of service standards. Mm-hmm. And I guess, John, if you can chime in on this, and Lloyd. So we have these standards in place. I mean, are these hard set standards that you cannot go over, or you have them in place? How do they?
This is what's in the general plan, Cliff, in 1994 general plan.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, how do they play in what, with these different uses, and how you propose to mitigate them? So, I mean, yeah. So, if you could,
I will defer to the city, because I think level service standards is community values. Therefore, level service D is actually keeping things pretty free flowing. A lot of jurisdictions now accept level service E, especially in more urbanized areas. So I want to stay a little bit agnostic on community values, but obviously level service standards can be set based upon what the community thinks should be acceptable for traffic levels.
That's absolutely correct. And the idea of a C is a fairly free-flowing, and it's actually kind of an unusually, Steve, you might mention that or speak to that. That's fairly unusual to maintain that level of free-flowing as a objective or goal. But again, those are all subject to the general plan and revision. And again, typically to achieve that standard, the traffic engineers would look at what kind of improvements to an intersection, because you're talking about intersection function. Can the intersection be widened? Can you change the signal timing? Can you do other modifications to achieve that level of service? So that's kind of the technical side of it.
Okay, so then just looking at the different options. On page 5, it says a total of 14 of the 18 intersections studied in the EIR within Brisbane and adjacent communities would fail to achieve the applicable LOS standards by 2030. Mm-hmm. So, and that's even the no development would occur within the Baylands. So, so we have these standards. So whatever we decide to do, we have to find ways to make sure that we stay within those LOS guidelines that we've established in the general plan, or do we modify that?
Well, I think that's, it's always the city's discretion to modify your general plan policies. You go through a public process. If that's something a council now or in the future chooses to do, that's at your discretion. Whether or not, it might be a question of whether these level of service standards can be feasibly achieved. If you can't widen the road enough to make the intersection function, or you don't want to widen an intersection so it's 9 lanes across or something, those are all the objectives that the council would have to set and decide. What would it take maybe to improve an intersection? And do you want that at any particular location, or do you have other values in the community that you're trying to achieve in terms of other modes? I think the other thing about level of service, it is oriented toward moving vehicles. That's not necessarily pedestrian comfort or bicycle safety. So those are all issues that come into play when it comes to determining level of service.
Okay, and then, so even if the Baylands wasn't developed, we have all these other projects that are on our border. And so because of the build out of those projects, that's would cause these levels of service to not be achieved because of this outside development, not in Brisbane, but because of development in San Francisco.
Development in San Francisco could be development in South San Francisco. So generally, we look at those specific projects that are so proximate to the Baylands, and we can obviously focus on those as being the major generators of the traffic, or the background traffic, or the growth. But of course, just in general, general traffic patterns and growth. People could be shifting over if 101 gets too backed up. So there could be a whole host of reasons why. But what you're pointing out is the forefront, the primary reason.
And so, on page 4, you talked about the different projects and the EIRs that are being prepared. The Bayview Hunters Point redevelopment plan, the Visitation Valley redevelopment program, Candlestick Point, Hunters Point Shipyard Phase 2 development, Executive Park development plan. So there's a lot going on. And so, what types of public transportation options are being considered for these developments to ease traffic situations and to move people in an efficient way?
Okay,
I know you talked about the BRT, but besides that,
so the Candlestick Point Hunters Point project. There is a transit plan for that specific project. Geneva Harney BRT. That's the premier project for Candlestick Point Hunters Point. But there is an extension of a host of muni routes that would extend into the project itself, from currently Bayview. I think it's the 44. Et cetera, would be extended in. There's also a couple express buses that would be implemented. The Hunters Point Express, HP Express, and the Candlestick Point Express, CPX. So those would be express buses that would go into downtown San Francisco, be similar to the ones that are operating on Geary, Balboa, et cetera, today. So that would be those are the primary transit improvements in the Candlestick Hunters Point project. For Schlegel Lock, that's also primarily relying upon Geneva Harney BRT. And then, I think we're all hoping that once there is development, and again, this is where I talk about chicken or the egg problem, Caltrain won't increase service at the Bayshore station until there's a reason to increase service. So hopefully with Schlegel Lock and increasing development in Executive Park, that will obviously create a tipping point for better service at Caltrain, at the Caltrain Bayshore station. So that together are the major transit improvements. There's currently a host of good service from Muni that touches the border. So we're looking at the 8X, the 8BX, the 8AX, the 9, the 9R. So there's a host of services in addition to the Muni T-Third, but those all primarily go into and out of San Francisco. The only real true route that you have that goes up and down the peninsula right now is the 292, and that operates, I believe, about 15-minute headways. But Samtrans, the ridership on that isn't super strong, but it does provide that connection up and down.
It does. Okay, so these particular developments, are any of them using the Baylands project as a means to mitigate some of their traffic issues?
My understanding is no. I believe all of the projects were approved prior to Baylands, so I believe those projects were being approved, and those would have made their own ER determinations and their own assumptions. So I believe that they have not brought in, since this project has brought in some assumptions from those projects because they were completed before the Baylands was.
Oh, okay, so say we did have a multimodal station. So you have Caltrain, the 3rd Street Light Rail comes to the station, the BRT is connected with the station, there are shuttles taking folks to BART. To me, it seems like if you had a station such as that, that could potentially have a significant reduction in traffic, because you've created a more efficient transit destination from which then to go anywhere in the area.
No, that's I'm in agreement with that. I think there were certain transit mode assumptions made for this project. Of course, wouldn't say that they're set in stone. They are forecasts. They are projections. If there was if Caltrain was offering up 5 trains per hour or 4 trains per hour, obviously their capacity is so much more improved, or the accessibility is so greatly improved. Yes, I think it could have a dramatic effect. Overall, there's obviously going to be some limit to the amount of transit use for the project itself, for the site itself. Does not mean that what the forecast was in the EIR, if we wanted to take a look at it again or make some different assumptions, we couldn't say that it could be higher. I agree with you there.
Okay, so then, like some of these LOS, scenarios, they were developed with not looking at a full-blown out multimodal station.
Well, I wouldn't say they weren't looked at without full-blown multimodal stations. They were the further on scenarios, that the cumulative scenarios 2030 did assume the Geneva extension. It did assume Geneva Harney BRT on the Geneva extension, so there would be a station right at the Caltrain at the tracks. So there would be easy accessibility from the overpass into the Caltrain station. Of course, that the detail of that, we can only speculate on the exact detail of that, but that was the assumption. So this project, the EIR did assume a fairly robust transit network. Does not mean that we couldn't make improvements to it, but it did assume a fairly robust and accessible transit network to the Baylands.
Okay, so all right, so it doesn't have. I know you talked about the 3rd Street Light Rail
Yes.
going to Schlechtschlag, but it doesn't really have. It wasn't studied that the 3rd Street Light Rail will go directly to the station.
I believe the intermodal station study did recommend that since the Schlechtschlag development, I believe Street A would connect or closely connect to the Bayshore station. The initial design or the initial concept that I'm thinking about actually did have the T3rd deviate. I think it was off maybe Raymond, deviate, and then go down into the Schlechtschlag site. Either it's adjacent to the Caltrain platform, the southbound platform, or a block away. Mm-hmm. But the assumption was to actually loop it around, and so it would deviate off of Bayshore and come around. And basically, the terminus right now is at Sunnydale and Bayshore, and it would loop and go down Sunnydale and hit the station there.
Okay.
I believe those assumptions change again. This is that study.
Moving.
Yeah.
Target, I guess.
Yeah, it's a movie. It's a movie.
Okay. I'm just.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of stations in Europe or stations in Japan. You're on one level in the station and you're catching a bus, and then the next level you're catching a train, and the next level you're catching, the light rail. All those pieces are there. It seems to me that you should move the station to a location where all of them can connect extremely efficiently, not walking a certain distance. When I looked at the BRT a few years ago, maybe it's changed. There was a gap between the station and where people would get off the bus. So I'm glad to hear that's been modified. But I hope that eventually, when it all comes together, that we're looking at trying to create transportation that is as efficiently as possible, because that is the key for people using it. If there's inconvenience, people will find other modes of transportation to use.
If I could just piggyback off of that, and maybe you can answer both our questions together. So I was thinking as well, I've been to places like Hong Kong where it's like that exact thing. You've got, the subway at the bottom, and then, the shopping center, and then the hotel stacked on top of that. And it's like, and then in between subway stations, there's these underground tunnels connecting the different stations so that people don't even have to walk on the street. And then above ground, there's these above ground pathways. So that, again, they're not walking on the street. And, here it's like close, but just not right on top of one another. It's like next to maybe a couple 100 feet away between the existing Caltrain station and where current Geneva Avenue is, So has the study looked at whether it's feasible to, if it can't be moved, efficiently or cost effectively, the Caltrain station, whether people would be likely to walk if there were walkways created, either underground tunnels or above ground walkways, so that it could be like it is in Europe and in Asia, where there's these, pathways for pedestrians that don't interact at all with cars, and make it accessible for people to use, various modes of public transportation.
Yes, and I think we could probably talk for hours on this topic. I mean, transit's my passion and my specialty, so I'm happy to continue talking about this as much as you want. But I think what we're looking at, I also want to point out that I don't know if there's any new designs. My understanding is that the station currently is in the assumption is currently a fixed location. So I wanted to point out that I hope I didn't misspeak that I don't know if there's been any decisions yet or currently any decisions to move the station itself. My understanding is that it's fixed. What I think we're looking at here, and in terms of what's going to happen with the station itself, if and when Geneva Extension gets built, I think what we're talking about is where the station is currently right now. If you move it further south, you'll obviously be a little bit more connected if you get off the bus and walk on the train. But without getting into any detail that I probably can't do right now because we haven't actually done design, there would the assumption, especially from a transportation professional, that there would be a grade separated, easy connection, hopefully sheltered connection from the BRT, from the Geneva Extension to the Caltrain station. As far as making it better, that's better and more connected and more proximate. I'm all for that, obviously, but there are physical and engineering limitations. Wanted to just finally say that as far as this project goes, the Baylands project, did not assume moving the station. It assumed the station moved because of what was in the Bayshore intermodal station study in terms of what that recommendation was from a bi-county perspective of how to best meet those needs. And the intermodal station study also focused on the Geneva-Harney BRT as well, and it was looking at routes through Recology and potentially, I think, even an additional maybe elevated route through Recology. So there are a bunch of different options that were being put on the table for the Geneva-Harney BRT and how that could connect to the station. So, I would be happy if you could, if that could get revised and re-engaged and there be better connection. Obviously, right now, MTA is moving forward with Geneva-Harney BRT at grade, which would, since there is no extension, but because of the Candlestick Hunters Point project coming online, Executive Park being redeveloped, there's going to be a need for that connection. So they're going to move forward with an at grade connection, and I think
using Blanken.
Using Blanken only through. There's number of different options, and I don't believe that any specific alignment has been figured out for that little half mile portion. But yes, that's what they're trying to figure out right now.
Okay. So the Geneva Avenue extension and the interchange at the freeway is going to be a pretty expensive project. I know there was a dollar figure in here. I think it was over $500,000. Over $500 million, but that had other things in it. Just the Geneva Avenue extension and the 101 interchange. What kind of dollars are we looking at approximately?
Can I defer to Randy on that one?
Round numbers, let's say $300 million.
About $300 million. Okay. And then, Randy, where would this money come from? Where are the pots?
That's a fascinating question, sir. No, honestly, it is. One of the conversations we had during the study session was how much funding has changed for transportation. If you had asked me that question 20 years ago when I first came here, I would have off the top of my head very flippantly said, well, 50% of that's going to come from the federal government, 25% of it's going to come from the state, and then the other 25% of it is going to be developer exactions. Maybe you'll have some conversation about redevelopment. That entire paradigm is upside down now. It's incorrect, and we're in a state of flux on that. You'll see one of the things, the major agency that directs both federal and state transportation funds in the Bay Area now is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and its dual role as the federal Metropolitan Planning Organization and the state regional transportation planning agency. And as you follow them along, and I'm sure the council members have, one of the things they are very much into doing is social planning, so that's why they do priority development areas, and that's why they are trying to have very intense developments. So projects that are very densified, that really have an opportunity for live work, that really do cut down on the amount of transportation, and that's whether you measure it in the old standard as level of service or whether you measure it in the more current and the developing standard, which is vehicle miles traveled. Those projects are going to be fast-tracked. Those projects are going to be favored and will get money. The projects that are not won't. So it's hard for me to tell you where the money's going to come from because I don't know what the project is yet.
Sure. So I guess it's safe to say some of that money is going to be determined upon how the site is zoned and permitted uses?
Yes, sir. Which project is permitted is going to very much determine which funding sources are available.
Okay. All right. Let's see. That. On page 7, and just want to get some clarification here. So the second paragraph, it says the EIR mitigation measure 4 and 4 it says requires Brisbane's participation in construction and funding. Regional transportation improvements identified in the bi-county transportation study. And to account for existing and projected background traffic, as well as traffic from the Baylands and other proposed and approved development projects in the area. So it says it requires Brisbane's participation in constructing and funding. So just reading this, I mean, it sounds like that Brisbane is also obligated to help contribute to development that's not inside Brisbane.
That's a Randy question. I asked that earlier, so it's not for Steve, I don't think, Randy.
I'll let Steve off the hook if that satisfies the council, sure. So the Bi-County Transportation Study, and my apologies to those of you who were at the study session, you're going to hear me blabber on the same thing that I said an hour ago. But the Bi-County Transportation Study was an effort that was begun back in the 1990s when the adjoining entities, the city and county of San Francisco, the cities of Brisbane, the cities of Daly City, are relevant congestion management agencies all looked at each other and said, we're all planning these big projects, these big developments. They're all going to have transportation impacts. Maybe we ought to sit down and talk about that and kind of do it holistically so we come up with something that works. And that seemed like a great idea. Over the course of about 10 years, we did that. And one of the things that we did, and as I mentioned earlier, part of what makes transportation planning so intrinsically unsatisfying is that at some point in time, you just got to say, these are the facts that I know today, and you got to run the model. And the model isn't a simple matter of hitting calculate on your Excel spreadsheet or calculate on your computer-aided design. You go away for a couple hours and it's back there. The models run for weeks. And then programmers come back for weeks and try and debug it, and they try and make calculations. So it requires us to make those steps. And as I know speakers before this council have said before, that there were assumptions that were input into those models, 6-7 years ago that are not current today. And that is absolutely correct. But the numbers and the assumptions that were made, I think the last time it was run was probably 2010, were accurate at the point in time. So what does all that mean? So after we did all that work, what we realized the last time we did that study was that we knew X number of projects, and we identified X number of transportation improvements that were going to benefit multiple projects. And then the parties to it looked at each other and said, okay, so when we do these projects, if let's pick Geneva Extension, okay? Geneva, the extension of Geneva, it's an easy one for me to pick because that is primarily going to be a City of Brisbane project. It's going to be located within the City of Brisbane. It's under the control of Caltrans. Where it joins Bayshore Boulevard, there'll be some control with the City of Daly City because they actually own that signalized intersection that's in their city limits, but it's mostly us. But when we did the study, we recognized that there were multiple parties that had both background development that was going to happen just because we were going to get more people coming into our cities, and also recognize that we were going to have different developments. And then we were able to calculate, based on the increased trips as a result of those developments, what a fair share percentage was. So each of those parties would have to say that, okay, so if we're going to spend $50 million to build the Geneva Avenue extension, we can calculate what a fair share is. Now to your specific question, I think I wouldn't have written the staff report quite the way it is. I think I would have said that the mitigation measure requires the City of Brisbane to participate in the bi-county study, but we're going to do that anyway. We have to because we're the public agency, but it doesn't commit us to fund it. What the funding is going to be whatever agreement that the City of Brisbane ends up making with the developer, and combined with or without additional external sources if we get any from MTC.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad you clarified that.
Sure.
Okay, so on page 8, it talks about shuttle services, and one of the main reasons why I'd like to see the station moved further south is that you can have that quarter mile, half mile radius of a variety of uses.
Mm-hmm.
The current location, right now, half of it fronts Recology. Yes, that is a use, but it's not a very...
Transit-oriented use?
Yeah, I mean, some workers work there, and some might, take the train to go to work, but there's not a lot of variety. So, but, here it talks about shuttles just within the Baylands. There's nothing that would preclude us from having shuttles that would connect Central Brisbane and the industrial park and the Ridge as part of that overall transportation system.
Oh, not at all. No, I mean, it'd probably be a good idea to explore as well, especially with, again, it's this chicken and egg problem, and right now with such a limited service at that station, the shuttle utility is lower. But obviously, if there was more development, there's going to be more train service. Then there's more trains, and that would, I think, kind of have that domino effect that would then have shuttles to downtown Brisbane, to more of the industrial areas. That would be a viable solution, absolutely. But I think specifically as a mitigation measure to provide transit accessibility to areas that are outside that quarter mile walk. That shuttle will provide that first mile, last mile. And I think we had it in there as 15-minute frequency, which probably is similar to what you would get in terms of Caltrain service at the station.
Oh, okay. So. And the next section has general plan policies, and there's 4 of them that talk about bicycle use and connectivity. And so, there seems to be a very growing trend of bicycle use. And so, we're looking at having this multimodal station, having a robust bicycle sharing program. How significant was bicycle use at the site for reducing vehicle miles traveled and emissions?
I can't speak to vehicle miles traveled or emissions. That's going to be Lloyd to speak to that. But and I don't have the exact number in me, but in terms of our trip generation, we did look at non-motorized trips, pedestrian and bicycle trips. So we actually did calculate what our estimates would be
using
for that.
The trends that are currently existing today and how they're projected to keep.
It was the best information that we had in 2012 when we ran the trip generation. So it could change today. I don't know for a fact that it would have a substantial difference. But in terms of, there's a lot more that's going on today than there was 5 years ago. Bike share has become a lot more prevalent. Could bike share be something that could take off in Brisbane or kind of northern San Mateo, southern San Francisco County? That's to be determined. Would there be bike share at the Bayshore Caltrain station? I think absolutely there should be.
Yeah.
I think another thing that's not in the EIR that I think has come up in the past 5 years more about car share. Should there be a car share station? So
yeah,
again,
absolutely, like car sharing and then like carpool parking only.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So
there's a lot of things that they're not in this document.
Well, there's a lot of things that aren't in the document, but I'd say also, and again, Lloyd can help me out here if he needs to. But in terms of being a programmatic EIR, a lot of that detail is not yet developed at the project level.
Okay.
So when you get down to individual development projects and you're requiring a certain amount of bike share, bike parking, car share. I do believe we do actually have in the air. There is the specific plan, and in that specific plan for the Baylands, there are specific requirements to how much bike parking is provided. We also did take a close look through all of that, and at that point in time, did recommend improvements from the plan that we had. Obviously, we don't have any specific project development, but in terms of what they would be providing, looking at the street networks, we wanted to ensure that there would be good connectivity. So there are mitigation measures in the EIR specifically for pedestrians and for bicycles.
Okay. All right.
But again, things do change, and 5 years from now, things could be changing a lot more. So.
Okay. On page 11, under the internal capture of trips within the Baylands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, under the Planning Commission. So the second sentence is, let's see.
I'm sorry, what paragraph were you on?
Let's see, the second paragraph.
Okay.
Actually, no, the third paragraph. So it says, concerns were raised during the public hearings that placing housing near jobs does not guarantee that the residents would be employed locally and therefore drive less. Was that was that the position of the Planning Commission? Or was that just comments that were taken from the public?
I will say that from what I understand, even in their trip generation documents, they said only 5% would be likely to live within the project, even with the developer
home-based
scenario.
work, yep.
At best case scenario would be around 5%. So
I mean, I think I just want to point out that obviously there's no guarantee that anyone would, but I think there's a high likelihood. So we're going on a best case, best assumptions and best professional judgment with that, and that is what what the modeling would tell us. And the mixed use trip generation model that we used for this project, it was approved. We had it approved by EPA and peer reviewed by EPA, and I believe it was based upon about 250 sites in terms of what was looked at in terms of trip generation. So again, it's probably not going to be 100% accurate, but again, I think we're getting to a point where we can pretty clearly, project that there is going to be some internal capture, and we projected 5%.
All right. So when this was evaluated, was the commission looking at workforce housing?
The commission and the EIR looks at the proposal of the applicant.
Got it. Okay.
Yes, so the developer-sponsored plan is the one that has residential in it. The commission, in their discussion regarding residential for a number of reasons, determined that residential would not be appropriate, and that's their recommendation. So they did not look specifically at potential requirements on for workforce housing that would be related to specific users on the site. So that was really not part of the commission's discussion.
Okay. So say a company like Google wanted to have a mini campus, and part of their thing was that they wanted to have some workforce housing, or Kaiser wanted to put in a hospital and they wanted some workforce housing. That particular type of housing would be 100%, almost 100% people that live there are going to work in the Baylands?
I would say that's probably could be a safe assumption to go on. I mean, obviously there's going to be some changes. Maybe that person gets then transferred to Mountain View, or that person then moves.
But for the most part,
yes,
the people that would be living there would be working there, and then typically, workforce housing tends to be subsidized by the owner of the company. So chances are a good portion of the workforce housing would be affordable. Is that a fairly accurate assumption, Lloyd?
I mean, it could be, but that's beyond what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
So, because we're at a point, we're dealing with a general plan amendment, and general plan level, we're dealing with a specific plan, which is a zoning question. There are no specific users identified for the site, but what a large-scale single-user campus could be might be very different than a typical multi-tenant office complex.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, if you had those types of scenarios, I mean, they would greatly influence the traffic circulation, and because you would be really using the public transportation, those types of interactions with work, but then also shopping and other things that we do and get there from, and how we get there to do those things seems to me, would have an impact on these numbers.
To tie in on that, when you look at a campus like Genentech, where a business provides lunch and maybe laundry service and daycare, you could put those same assumptions that if you had a campus like Genentech, that people aren't going off campus as much because everything's free there.
That's true.
And so you'd have less trips. But I take it back. Maybe it's Facebook that's free.
Google.
Not Genentech.
Subsidized.
But I was using that as an example where many of those workers don't go off campus as much. They're encouraged to stay on campus because many of their amenities are located there. And so, but even with your thought of housing being workforce housing and subsidized, you would assume that not necessarily your husband, wife, and child would all work there.
No, and they could hop on the train and go to wherever they needed to go, or bus, or it just again, it's like looking at these numbers and how they're formulated, and are they looking at if housing is looked at in one perspective, and then that's how you evaluate your LOS. Are there other housing options that change then those numbers?
The answer is definitely yes. When we do this analysis, we're purposely being conservative, and since we don't have any specific understanding of exactly what the tenant would be or what that housing would be, we have to be conservative. So obviously, we're basing our estimates off averages and off published data. I would say that if a project came through and there was a specific project where the city directed the environmental consultants to look at a project that had that workforce housing, et cetera, then yes, I think you'd see a different result. But right now we're being conservative. I'm comfortable with my conservative analysis here, and hopefully it takes over the overall envelope of impacts, and hopefully it could be less if you have a little bit more synergy like you're talking about.
Okay, and the same things with like parking. I mean, you're looking at parking for these housing units, correct? Mm-hmm. Whereas you could have, the city could impose certain parking restrictions, and that, say, a workforce housing site could have just shared cars that are zero emission vehicles that the company owns but lets their workers use, and you can have a certain amount of cars per units so that you drastically reduce the amount of cars that are driven by people who reside in the Baylands.
Absolutely, and that would be, whether it's a general plan amendment for parking requirements or a specific plan amendment, absolutely. Again, that's more about the values that you want to impose or have on that specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
element.
All right. That's it for now.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, I do want to get to the public, so unless anyone has any other
I
comments?
have one
Okay.
question.
I do too.
Or questions at this point.
I was able to divide them all up by topic.
Okay.
So after all the questions were asked, there's one that I have that's remaining. It's related to page 472 of the Planning Commission meetings regarding 472.
I'm going to go sit down and study.
Yeah, go ahead. Regarding a comment made by Mr. Zola, and it's in the second paragraph. So it says, in response to the comments made, Mr. Lloyd Zola of Metis Environmental Group, a consultant to the city for preparation of the Baylands Environmental Impact Report, noted that the traffic-related mitigation measures are identified in the EIR, which require the developer to provide improvements in San Francisco and Daly City at a series of intersections. The issue occurs if Daly City or San Francisco does not allow for the construction of the improvements. Brisbane cannot compel Daly City or San Francisco to actually allow for construction of the improvements. He clarified that this is the reason for the significant unavoidable impact, not an inability to improve the intersections in question to function at an acceptable level. So we kind of discussed a little bit about this at the study session, but I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into it. What happens if that happens?
Well,
It's a really straightforward question.
it is.
Yeah.
And the answer would be, I'll start with a bunch of ifs, because if the city of Brisbane would approve, for example, the developer-sponsored plan and approve a specific plan, subject to these mitigation measures, you as a city would require that those improvements be offered to the city and county of San Francisco and offered to the city of Daly City by the developer. You would work as a city with them to try and get their concurrence to accept those improvements. If the city of if San Francisco or Daly City would accept those improvements, then the requirement would move forward and the applicant would implement the mitigation measure. If San Francisco or Daly City would say, no, thank you, we do not want that improvement, you are not to touch our intersection, then because you would have a significant unavoidable impact that you would have an overriding consideration for, you would, if you went that route, essentially allow the project to go forward, even in the face of San Francisco or Daly City saying no thank you. Now you could, and that's the simple answer, you could, as part of an approval, say that should either of those two cities not accept the improvements that are necessary, then we as a city of Brisbane will rethink the land use. We're simply not going to let you move forward with all that development in the absence of the physical improvements in those other cities. But the simple, straight answer would be the developer can move forward because you've already approved it and said we recognize those two cities might not accept those improvements.
So you develop that as essentially a contingency when you make your agreement.
Yes, you could. You could add that contingency to a development agreement or to the specific plan or to the approval of a development project.
So based on the Planning Commission's recommendation to the council, did they have that contingency? Did they mention that being important?
The Planning Commission went a whole different route. The Planning Commission's recommendation, as they looked at traffic being not meeting City of Brisbane standards in that future condition without any development, adding, what the impacts of adding Baylands development to that would be, the uncertainty regarding acceptance of those improvements in other cities. The Commission's recommendation was that their recommendation to you is that the City of Brisbane would be better off not approving that level of development, and so they have recommended a substantial reduction in the amount of development that would be permitted within the Baylands, something similar to what is now permitted by your general plan, and not getting into the issue of what if San Francisco doesn't accept an improvement, what if certain improvements that we've assumed would be done, like Geneva Extension, like the Candlestick Interchange, are not built. The Planning Commission is recommending a much more minimal direction to you, which is minimize the amount of development and don't try and rely on those major improvements later.
Although most of these intersections are going to fail in their level of service regardless. So in that scenario, the City of Brisbane would be more difficult for the City of Brisbane to point to the developer and say, because of your development, you have caused this level of service failure, and therefore you need to mitigate that, right? So would it be more difficult to do that because there's so much because the intersections are going to fail anyway?
It's a little bit more difficult to isolate the developer's share. I mean, it's really easy when in the future condition, those two intersections that operate at appropriate level of service without the project, then Baylands development trips the threshold and you say, now they failed, it's all yours. Under any circumstance, what's typically done and what would be done here is the requirement to the project, to Baylands development, would be to mitigate their portion of the total amount of new traffic thrown at every one of the intersections, whether they're the last one in line that tripped it over the threshold or not. Participating or contributing traffic to an intersection that fails is an impact, and there is a requirement for mitigation, even if you are not the cause and effect. So we don't have to find, or you don't have to find, cause and effect. Contribution to that significant impact is adequate to require mitigation.
Okay, so you can essentially add that as a contingency, even if the development is scaled back, millions of square feet, correct?
Yes, because even at 1 to 2 million square feet of new development, which is the Planning Commission's recommendation, there would remain impacts far smaller than are proposed in any of the four scenarios, but there would be impacts, and you would still have requirements for contribution, fair share contributions to impacts, both within and outside of the city.
Okay, that's my only question. Thank you.
So to follow up on that, and I think that was a great question to ask, so we could put in since we're theoretically increasing the size of what's allowable on the Baylands, we could, as a city, say to the developer, we won't issue the permits to do that until the Geneva extension is built, or the Geneva interchange is built.
I'll give an answer, then I'll defer to CEQA counsel. I think the way that the mitigation measures are now written is we as a city, or the city of Brisbane, could allow a certain amount of development within the Baylands prior to the funding and completion of Geneva, as long as current standards are being met, but at some point, as the LOS standards would not be met, further development could not occur. So we now tie the fair share funding and availability of those improvements to the amount of development that's occurring and to the level of service on area roadways.
But you could do it either way.
Yes.
Okay. And then as what I've noticed as a problem with the traffic in the Bay Area is that so many companies, employees like living in San Francisco because it's hip and vibrant and all that. And so a lot of the transportation is going to workplaces down south. A lot of the transportation has done a reverse commute, basically. And so looking at these projects that are close to us with the Hunters Point redevelopment, Viz Valley, Candlestick, all those projects, I would like to see from staff the next time, or as information that we get, is the mitigation measures that were required for those EIRs and what's actually been done. Because from what we heard from staff, it sounds like most of those are the BRT and a few extra bus lines. And those cumulative projects appear to have probably as much impact as what some of the Baylands projects would impose on the Bay Area. And yet we're looking at requiring much more real hard infrastructure, or we're assuming that hard infrastructure is going to be built. And so I'd like to see what those EIR mitigations were, and if any, what has actually been done besides the getting close to the BRT to help mitigate our level of service at our own intersections that are being affected, even without and separate from the Baylands project. So I'd like to see, maybe a staff recap of what those mitigation measures were for those 5 or 6 projects that are within that sphere of
Yeah,
influence.
I'm picturing something along the line of a matrix that would show each project, where they were required to provide improvements or fair share, and then a notation on what has actually been done or not done.
And maybe a size comparison.
Yeah.
They're 10% the size of what Baylands would be. I mean, I know that,
Sure.
One of the projects at the old Candlestick was massive retail. And so, I'd like to see that. And then as an aside, just because I was curious and I could look it up on my iPad, the 101 Burlingame intersection revamp was budgeted at $51.6 million for just that one interchange, and $32 million was from San Mateo County, $11 million from the state, $3.6 from the feds, and $5 million from the city of Burlingame. Just as interesting facts.
Lori, are we going to talk about pollution and noise later?
We are.
Okay.
So are there any other questions from the council before we open it up to the public on that topic of transportation?
Are we going to
Okay.
have staff, or,
All right, so I'm going to
Public.
read, I'm sorry, Terry?
so then we're going to go to public now?
We're going to go to
A
the
little
public
bit.
now. Yeah.
Just regarding transportation.
Yes, so I'm going to read the slips. I don't know what topic they're on, so if it's on transportation, I'm sorry, on traffic, then please come up. Otherwise, let me know what it's on and I can make a note. So the first slip is Anka Enti. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Is Anka still here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. I know she wanted to speak at the end of the study session, but, okay. Move on to James Rui Gomez.
Whew, long nights, huh?
Yeah.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Honorable City Council, and hard-working city staff. My name is James Gomez, and I'm here representing the San Mateo Building Trade Council. The San Mateo Building Trade Council is comprised of 26 local construction unions with over 16,000 members, and in an effort to save time rather than having our members in attendance take the podium and make their comments, I'd like them all to stand and remain standing while I speak on their behalf. First, I want you to be sure you know that our organization will work closely with the city, the developer, and the general contractor to ensure that construction traffic, impact on air quality, and noise are kept to a minimum during the construction process. Also, in addition to providing thousands of living wage jobs, this project will be built to the highest green building standards. Our members receive regular training on the best practices for green building, and we are ready to stand with you on your commitment to sustainability. These individuals standing are part of the largest privately funded educational system in these United States. They fund their training programs on their own, and individuals enrolled receive up to 2,500 to up to 7,000 hours of on-the-job training and classroom training in order to earn journeyman or journey person worker status. This ensures that they are highly skilled to build the job right the first time, on time, and on budget, and they pride themselves in doing so. We support you in your efforts to make this project a nationwide model for sustainability, and we sincerely hope that you will ensure housing is built on this site. Our members are being priced out of the area, like so many others, and housing as part of the approved project will only provide valuable jobs for our members, but also help the regional housing crisis which affects us all. We believe you have an incredible opportunity to make a difference with this project. We also believe that by working closely together, using the best practices to ensure the highest quality engineering, materials, and remediation and construction methods, that we can and should build housing on this site. We look forward to the opportunity to work with you and the developer on the Brisbane Baylands project over the coming years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight. Okay. The next slip is Paul Krupka.
Good evening, Mayor Lou and members of the City Council. My name is Paul Krupka. I'm an independent transportation consultant with over 35 years of multimodal experience in the San Francisco Bay Area and substantial work right here in San Mateo County and Silicon Valley. I'm a registered California civil engineer and traffic engineer. I have studied development and transportation projects of all kinds and sizes, and have conducted numerous transportation analyses like the one done for Brisbane Baylands. I'm here tonight just to provide a summary professional opinion about some important transportation planning features of the project, Baylands project that is, which I hope will add value to your deliberations. First, I see an abundant active transportation set of active transportation features, bicycle, trail, pedestrian features, which will help to reduce traffic and trip generation. The project incorporates a robust transportation demand management program, which complements the jobs housing linkage, the complete streets design, and promotion of active transportation. For example, it'll include TDM coordinators to facilitate and communicate the program and monitor the single occupant vehicle usage. It includes transit strategies to provide incentives to use transit and shuttles. It offers alternative work schedules to allow employees to avoid employees and residents to avoid peak travel periods. It offers reduced parking requirements near transit hubs and stops, which complement expected transit usage. It offers rideshare matching and promotion to encourage carpool and vanpool usage. Incorporates car sharing pods to provide alternatives to car ownership. It incorporates unbundled parking in residential areas to reduce the cost of housing. And finally, the TDM plan incorporates bicycle parking, which indeed promotes bicycle usage. In addition, the project is proximate with direct connections to both Muni and Caltrain, and this accommodates and promotes transit usage, as Mr. Crossley was pointing out. Project shuttles required serve the last mile transit connections as well as intra project transport, thereby reducing external vehicle trips. The mixed use development maximizes opportunity for internal trip capture and indeed will also reduce air quality and greenhouse gas impacts. The proposed housing would improve these conditions measurably. Quantification of vehicle miles traveled complements the anticipated changes to CEQA, which are mandated under Senate Bill 743, the change from intersection level of service as the measure to vehicle miles traveled as the measure. In my opinion, the Baylands project is unique. It offers many complementary transportation features to reduce the overall external impacts on the transportation system. The inclusion of housing would provide additional transportation benefits and help ease the housing crisis we all face. I would like to commend you, your community, the staff, and the sponsor for the diligent and comprehensive efforts that you've undertaken to date, and wish you well as you continue to complete your decision-making process. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bill Detmer. Okay. Come back to that. Barbara Ebel.
Ooh, I like to sleep. Ooh. Okay. This is my first time doing a PowerPoint, so I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm afraid I might run long. I was actually hoping you'd have a public comment on items not on the agenda today, because I wanted to ask you guys at some point to think about what you want to do with people who have actual presentations and don't want to just give, a few comments. And I didn't get a chance to do that, and so I guess I had better just start. Is this number one, Ingrid? Yeah. Okay. So I was hoping there'd be more people here. I'd like to ask for a show of hands of people who would like to live near work. Who would like to live near work? Okay? I think that's pretty much all of us would like to have. Who would like to live near work if it doubled their spouse's commute? Because they work in the other direction. Who would like to live in a mediocre school district because that's where their work is? Any hands? Who would like to live by work if it meant they have to have a condo instead of a single-family home? A couple people. Yeah. So I think you can understand why there is some dogma we need to tackle here concerning the underlying assumptions. Why still 75 and 80% of people choose to drive, even when we provide housing, public transportation options. Public transportation is a really good thing. It is the absolute, we simply cannot make the needed greenhouse gas reductions without public transportation. But keep in mind that this is so far, it's been named a golden goose, but so far it has only laid plain white eggs. Another frequent problem with the data set when looking at green reductions in CO2 from driving, these studies rarely account for the increased emissions from public transportation. CO2e savings for public transportation is about 50 to 80% depending on the vehicle, data source, and system efficiency. So actual gains realized are much smaller than the graphs. So keep in this mind when you are thinking about this. They are valuable but relatively small reductions. So much of greenhouse gas reductions are predicated on an increase in the availability of public transportation. Historically, we have not seen this investment. Spur, a Bay Area housing advocacy site, found that the average San Francisco's overall footprint is about 6% higher than the average American's. The average footprint was lower than you might expect, however, because city dwellers usually have a larger carbon footprint. Due to the higher disposable incomes, greater levels of consumption, and transportation. Oops. And up here, this is the worldwide Hyperloop system as proposed in 2008. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the 2010 system. Has anybody seen anything to do with the Hyperloop? Supposedly it's coming through Sacramento. Unfortunately, the Baylands has a relatively lax transportation demand management plan. I went to their meeting last night and heard about some really wonderful and aggressive transportation demand management plans that require zero new trip generation. I would think that that would be a starting place for the Baylands. Total Baylands transportation emissions inventory provided by GMV Consultants is 128,000 metric tons of CO2e, not including the Baylands development. This is before Baylands development. And yet the DSP carbon footprint gives a housing credit of 64,000 metric tons of carbon, or about half of Brisbane's total emissions, is going to be saved by 5% of people living and working on the Baylands. I don't understand that. We're going to be adding 12,000 trips, 9,000 or more of which will use the roads to commute.
I think we're on a different slide here.
Oh, sorry.
No, I mean from what we're showing.
Yeah, so this was just showing the shortfall in this transportation funding that is needed to make these plans happen. So we should be on like 9 now. And so this is just kind of like background information. The DSP is projected to generate 8,256 auto trips during peak traffic, and I'm out of time. Do you want me to continue? I'm sorry, I'm a little unfamiliar with this process.
How much longer is there?
I'm probably about 2/3 of the way done.
Why don't you finish up?
Okay. The DIR assumes that 35% will choose public transportation. So, yeah, I think next slide. So, it's assuming that we're going to cut our emissions in half. So does that mean we're going to have 50% less cars on the road? Because I'm not sure how else you cut your transportation emissions. So I just did a quick Photoshop here and Photoshopped out half the cars off of 101 here. I decided to ignore the DEIR and use the more conventional 20% of people opting out of driving. So given that of those who drive, 42% will be heading north to SF, that means 2,777 rush hour trips. And then next slide, I just said, well, let's assume this is 10 seconds worth of road. So I divided that out, and that would be about 8 additional cars in the distance depicted here. It's a rough estimate. So and yet they somehow think that this is just we're gonna have this enormous reduction. And yet, as near as I can figure, we've got 8 more cards for every X feet on 101. I've complained about this aspect of the DEIR, this funny math, like the 5% is going to save us 50% of our emissions. And I still can't see it. Nobody can still explain to me where I'm wrong. I'd love to be embarrassed, but I can't get it. It's no joke. It's hard to know how to count emissions sometimes. The agricultural sector accounts for farming, food production, but depending on who's counting, the cost of shipping food from rural farms to population centers is sometimes counted. I think we should be on 12 now. Sorry. Is sometimes counted under agricultural emissions, but more often counted under transportation emissions. Things get complicated. The externalization of emissions allow us to game our own system, making some choices appear more rewarding and others less so. For example, alternately, we can easily live a car-free lifestyle if we take Lyft everywhere and have all of our consumer goods delivered by Google Express. And then here's 13, so we're on the right slide. Oop, back one. Council knows that methane is 80 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. I guess this is actually the next section. Do you want me to come back for that, since I was going to talk a little bit about emissions?
Yeah. Let's
Okay,
do that.
so I'll just leave it there, and then we'll just come back for the last 2 slides.
Thank you. And will you provide a copy of that slide presentation?
It's written better than I did today. I was kind of...
Appreciate the work you put into that. Okay, so moving on to Anya Miller.
Good evening, Council. Glad to be here. And I'm just going to have to say something for the legal record. You already addressed many of the issues very appropriately. I really was glad to hear the study session, that you're into understanding what we're up against. But I do want to read the statement for the record. Because before considering any development on the Baylands, you must focus on the unavoidable significant traffic impacts generated by our neighboring cities. These impacts will drastically affect our residents that you represent. You represent us, not everybody else. Our residents and businesses, daily lives and work and movements in and out of town, our town. The Baylands EIR cites more than 25,000 new housing units and millions of square feet of commercial development already planned and approved in San Francisco's Hunters Point, Candlestick, and Slays Lock projects, as well as Daly City's Geneva corridor. These numbers are in the public domain, but most of our people in Brisbane do not understand, are not familiar with this risk and this threat to us. And so they, just trust you. And these vehicles, these developments will add to our local arteries and much heavier burden on an already near capacity public transit we have. It would be senseless to add a large development load to this by allowing more from the Baylands than your planning has recommended. They did recognize the limits, and they recommended a positive use of the land for the renewable energy installation that would not generate any traffic while providing a significant public benefit. The main mitigation measure offered for the impacts of this huge average traffic in the Bi-County Transportation Study of 2013 and the submitted Baylands plan is the so-called Geneva extension, which you discussed. Brisbane's share in that Bi-County study is estimated, or was estimated in 2010, to be $126 million. $126 million for the Geneva extension by Brisbane. But under the Planning Commission's recommendation, this 9-lane, massive, very expensive overpass would not really be needed by Brisbane. And your council should be resisting any further efforts to burden our city with that cost. We do not actually, it could be surface connection to the station. Another much touted argument, particularly by outside special interests, which we heard again, in favor of the plans you're considering is, quote, transit-oriented development with a focus on increased access and use of the Caltrain Bayshore Station and the Muni T-line. That approach is already amply represented by the Slade Lock plans, housing of 1,600 units, 600, immediately adjacent to the station, and anticipated bus connection from Hunters Point Candlestick. There have been many indications of doubt about Caltrain, even after the electrification, that it would be able to accommodate the added ridership. There's no assurance. For Brisbane train users also, that result would be even more restricted transit access for us, your people. Our general plan currently does not allow any development that causes traffic congestion at the level of service that falls below C at our crucial intersection of Bayshore Old County Road. Because the recently completed traffic study for Sierra Point shows that cumulative regional development will already cause the level to fall below or to level F, why would we unnecessarily add to that unacceptable situation? Furthermore, on this LOS, the current efforts to measure traffic, that's been cited, the vehicle miles traveled as a measure to measure greenhouse gas. It does not measure congestion. And that's what we're dealing with. Our citizens here, living here now, are dealing with the coming congestion. And that's what you should be dealing with, not the grand plans of San Francisco that may or may not come true. So you just need to keep the LOS in mind, not just go for the vehicle miles traveled. And both measures are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Ariel Fleischer.
Good evening. My name is Ariel Fleischer, and I'm a Transportation Policy Associate with SPUR. SPUR is a nonprofit organization that promotes good planning and good government in the Bay Area through research, education, and advocacy. And we are here tonight to express our support for the Brisbane Baylands plan. Primarily because SPUR cares about creating better ways to get around without a car. The Baylands will result in less traffic than traditional developments because it places high-use areas, things like offices, residents, retail, restaurants, and entertainment, in close proximity to transit stops. Caltrain is on the verge of a massive transformation, and new transportation technology is making it easier to get around without a car. The Baylands also places new housing near jobs. The existing Bayshore Caltrain station on the Baylands site is one of the most underutilized stations in the Bay Area. The Baylands plan will add over 4,000 homes around the Caltrain station. As the EIR demonstrates, by placing housing near jobs, the Baylands will create fewer traffic challenges and regional trips in the community-sponsored plan. Placing housing near transit reduces traffic and greenhouse gas emissions. It's a socially and sustainably right thing to do. The Baylands includes best practices for transportation. We were pleased to see that the Baylands includes a robust TDM plan that will include a car-sharing program, unbundled parking, transit subsidies, and transit passes and shuttle services. We were also pleased to see that the plan features an extensive pedestrian and bicycle network, including a 2-mile extension of the Bay Trail connecting from Candlestick in San Francisco to Sierra Point in Brisbane. The TDM measures, in concert with the enhanced bicycle and pedestrian network, will help ensure that the majority of trips made from the site will be as a pedestrian or by bike or by transit. I'd also like to take a moment to point out that the state is actually moving away from using level of service as an indication of when looking at the impacts of a project moving away from considering intersection delay and actually looking at the total vehicle miles traveled of a project. And if we think about this project in that context, you have biking, you have walking, you have transit use. This is a project that's going to be able to reduce our vehicle miles traveled and have a really important impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, in the end, we strongly support this project and urge the Council to approve the Brisbane Baylands plan. Should the Council decide not to approve the plan, we urge you to work with the developer as a partner to approve a feasible plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Adina Levin. And I believe we received some materials from you as well on this.
Yes, you did. So Adina Levin with Friends of Caltrain. Friends of Caltrain is a 501c3 nonprofit with over 5,000 participants on the Peninsula Corridor from San Jose through San Francisco, and we support successful modernization of Caltrain stable funding in the context of an integrated and sustainable regional transportation system. And there's more slides here than I will go through in a brief public comment, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things about in this region and in the area that Friends of Caltrain focuses on. There's been a lot of change and progress in practices that cities are using to address traffic and greenhouse gas emissions, and wanted to call out some things that are being done in other cities that may be relevant to Brisbane as you make decisions about this potential project. So the examples that we're most familiar with are with major employers, and Stanford is one of the leaders here. They were given a trip cap by Santa Clara County about 15 years ago when they wanted to grow their campus and add employees. And Santa Clara County said, yeah, sure, go ahead, add buildings, add employees, you just can't add any more car trips. And they successfully did that. They got their drive-alone mode share down from in the 70s down to under 50%. Go ahead. And they had, even though they had more people, they had absolutely less cars and less greenhouse gas emissions. So you say, okay, Stanford is a large major employer. They have a lot more control over their people. You know, what can we do if this is something that's not one major employer? And so this is where we're seeing a lot of innovation in cities, including the city of San Mateo. So what cities are doing is setting those trip and mode share goals, and then for plan areas and setting up transportation management associations so that they can provide those Stanford-like benefits that got that driving rate all the way down to a development that may include multiple tenants, that may include more than one use. And one key here to success is leveraging what Stanford does in terms of data, understanding its transportation population, and then public reporting. Not just aspirational goals where a developer says, I'm going to do this, but then they never do. So in the city of San Mateo, they did such a plan in their rail corridor in the area from Hayward Park to Hillsdale, with the former Bay Meadows and other sites in that area. They set a goal of 25% trip reduction in an area that has a mixed use, commercial, residential, and retail. And they require annual reporting to the Planning Commission and the City Council. So this isn't one big employer, this is multi-tenant development and mixed multiple uses. They have 100% goal compliance. This looks like the most boring thing in the universe, except for what this is each development has a certain number of trips it can generate, and it's not allowed more, and that is reported on an annual basis to Planning Commission and City Council. Everybody's in compliance to date. Another example here is Mountain View in North Bayshore, where the City Council said, first they said, well, we want to have a trip cap like Stanford did. They checked with professionals. Professionals said, we can't quite get that far, but if we work hard, we can get to a 45% drive-alone rate. And they said, well, in order to do that, what improvements and policies do we need to do? And they concluded that they could achieve a 35% transit use, 10% active transportation, biking and walking, 10% ride sharing, and they use that to guide their investments and programs in this area, including their Transportation Management Association that's running their shuttles to and from the transit station and around in the area. Another example here, as we're seeing in the city of Menlo Park, which was looking at the area near Facebook and near the Bay, and they were looking at, should we continue this as an office-only industrial area? And they concluded that they wanted to have a live, work, play environment, and what their EIR concluded was similar to what the Brisbane EIR concluded, is that if you have housing near jobs, you wind up with less vehicle miles traveled per person. If you can skip past Palo Alto, this is really interesting in terms of being able to understand the data of the transportation population and use those to create programs that will reduce trips based on the needs of the people in that specific area. But if you can scoot down to where it talks about the Brisbane Baylands, so we can conclude. I'll be happy to do a longer version of this at the meeting where you'll have more community presentations, and would be happy to talk further or answer questions, but I want to be respectful of the time. So which things can apply to Brisbane? So first of all, the current draft has very weak goals for the expected number of car trips. And as I believe a council member Lance brought up, there are things that the city could do and could be requiring of the developer and the developments to have a lower driving rate and be able to make investments and set requirements that would reduce those trips and would reduce that traffic, taking pages from what some of the other cities are doing. By the way, the internalization rate, the housing near jobs in Mountain View that they were looking, they were estimating 10 to 20%, not 5%. I'm not sure technically how it's different, but that is what they were assuming, and council went back and said, hey, 10 to 20%, we want to look and see if there's ways to incent that to be more. So the another lesson from the other cities is that alternatives with housing do generate less car trips and less greenhouse gas emissions, in addition to addressing our regional housing shortage and the affordability crisis from that. So from the perspective of trips and traffic and greenhouse gas emissions, housing is a major transportation solution. So things that the city could do to reduce trips with programs following other cities, and consider the housing as a transportation solution. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was very informative. Karen Cunningham.
Madam Mayor, City Council, I'm sorry, I did not get this lady's name.
Adina Levin.
It wasn't part of what I was going to say, but I just thought I would like to add something to her comments. As she said, some of the alternatives are probably quite relevant in a situation where you have established infrastructure in a community. We're not talking about the Baylands, which has any infrastructure or anything going on at all. So it sounded great when we're talking about Palo Alto or Menlo Park or San Mateo or San Francisco or anywhere else in the Bay Area. We're talking about a completely blank slate out here with a complete set of unknowns that we really still know very little about at this point. So, one of the barriers to success in this planning process is that we don't have an established community or industry. We only have a projected situation in the area. So, that sounded very nice, but I didn't feel it was very applicable to what's actually reality, with all due respect to the presenter. Something else that was brought up was Bayshore Boulevard. I really want to say, when I was part of the Planning Commission, and even before that, for many, many years, we've seen Bayshore Boulevard degrade into, you might still call it a D, but I think most of us at this point would probably call Bayshore Boulevard an F in both directions as a highway. And how do we fix that? I don't know, but Anya brought it up. The traffic on Bayshore is a nightmare, and we've seen over the last few years, few months, few weeks, how many more accidents are actually happening there with the current traffic as it is, without even thinking about what's going to happen when we're putting things out on the Baylands. So I want to keep those things really foremost in our minds. But the reason I wanted to talk to you in the first place was just to ask a question. Can we please get a little set that you can give out to the general public? And I came to listen to the comments tonight, trying to be the novice in the audience, and even as somebody who has listened to every meeting and everything going on for many, many years, I am so lost with some of the acronyms that you were floating about tonight. The LOS and the CCR and the CCP and blah, 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 blah. So can we please get a list of those acronyms that you guys are like flying around like it's eat toast, put butter on your bread, drink a glass of milk? Because I think most of the people who are watching, most of the people in the audience really know nothing about what an LOS actually really is. Thanks.
Deb Horn.
Hello, council members. My name's Deb Horn, and once again, I'm reminded to thank you so much for your service, because you have to listen to all these acronyms and all this information and, get in the weeds about all these things where there's so many details, and these are big decisions. So thank you for your time and your service. I was home. I wasn't going to come down tonight, and I was listening to the transportation study, and the thing that kept occurring to me, I always like to cut to the chase to what are the basic questions here, is these are assumed improvements, transportation improvements, where feasible. There's no planning, there's no definitive planning yet, there's no identified funding source for all this public transit and road widening. And we hear some of the examples, like Terry talking about how much one intersection costs. So transportation is something that I know something about as a writer, public transportation, and also I worked for the MTA for 16 years. I'm very aware of how complex and how long the transportation planning process is, especially when it's inter-county. So when Muni wants to do something, it's just Muni, but it's very complicated and takes 20 to 25 years to extend a rail line. When it's something like BART extensions, we've lived through BART extensions, right? How many years does that take? Because you have to identify funding sources. You have to work through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, another acronym, to get all the planning, all the coordination. What if this town doesn't want this? And, all of these things. So I guess what I want to say is, as someone who knows about transportation, is please make sure that the transportation plan is in place. The funding has been identified and committed to for all of these different extensions of transportation, public transportation. It's critical. Just to have a assumed mitigation where feasible isn't really good enough to know that transportation's handled. The other thing I just want to say as a writer is I ride Caltrain and rode my bike to our Bayshore station to take my bike and do my get my ride down to Redwood City, and there was no spots for bicycles. All taken already. So then I would drive there and try and catch a ride, and there was no seats. This is during commute times. So again, assurances that Caltrain can carry some of this burden of 10,000 extra trips a day, that the roads can carry the burden. Muni, we know, is overburdened. So just some reassurances, some concrete reassurances that these different transportation organizations can actually deliver on this fabulous plan that we have. I love the plan. Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. Michael Barnes?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Michael Barnes. I'm a Brisbane resident. The Bay Area is changing, and you know that no matter what project is approved for the Baylands, even if it's no project, the level of service will be violated at a number of intersections around Brisbane. And if you do approve a project, more intersections are impacted. Congested roadways and transit systems will actually lead to new transit solutions, I believe. And as an example, when Samtrans canceled our 24 bus that came into the middle of town, we asked for and received a shuttle bus with a driver and a cell phone. And so that shuttle bus driver would circle through town after people would call up and say, take me to Tanforan or what have you. And that actually increased ridership on the shuttle by 5-fold over what the 24 bus was carrying. Now, I can't predict, what future solutions we'll see, but I feel like the transportation problems we're seeing now are actually causing government and transportation solutions, government to look for new solutions. And so as these intersections in town exceed their level of service as defined by the general plan, you're going to have to amend the general plan. And as long as you're making changes to the general plan, I also think you ought to change the prohibition to housing on the Baylands. Facebook has actually proposed designing 1,500 rental units in Menlo Park because they recognize they need their employees to live closer to home. Google has proposed 500 units, has proposed to actually build 500 units in Mountain View, 15% of which will be affordable. And they also have on the books 10,000 more housing units that they want to build in Mountain View. And again, there's some debate, should these units just be for Google employees or just for Facebook employees? The cities are kind of pushing back on that. But these companies are putting their money where their hurt is, and that is to build housing so their employees don't have to get on a Caltrain or get bumped off a Caltrain because there's no room for their bicycles. I expect that businesses on the Baylands may also understand the wisdom of this approach. Finally, in the One World presentation, the guys who designed your sustainability framework, they actually have developed a housing project that does not permit private cars in the development. Only car share is permitted there. And it sold out. It's very popular, and I believe this is something that can actually work on the Baylands. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Corey Smith?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Corey Smith. I'm representing the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. We're an 18-year-old nonprofit that advocates for housing and transportation growth around the Bay Area. To kind of start off in this whole work where you live conversation, just from a personal standpoint, I rent a basement in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood because it is only a 12-minute bus ride to work. So I know for myself and many of my peers, it's certainly a value that I really like. Just to be clear, we're talking about transportation right now, then we're going to touch on environmental issues later, correct? Cool. So in San Francisco, one of the things we're recently going through, it's going before our Board of Supervisors next Tuesday, hopefully, is what's called the Transportation Demand Management Program. And I've actually been really frustrated about it on a lot of levels because it looks at things on a micro perspective a lot of times, but doesn't necessarily take the whole big picture into account. So looking at the big picture in the Bay Area as a whole, since the 1950s, according to the United States Census, we have grown as a region by about 4.8 million people. And in that same period of time, we've added about 1.7 more households. In 2000 alone, the Bay Area has produced 11 times as many jobs as homes for people to work. What has that resulted in? The famed drive until you qualify quote, where the majority of density that's occurring in the state of California right now, especially in Northern California, is in Sacramento, Stockton, Modesto, and Merced. And a joint study by the University of the Pacific and the Bay Area Council shows that on a daily basis, you have over 200,000 people driving, the significant majority of them alone, from those Central Valley cities into the Bay Area core, which has a huge, huge impact on the entire region. The vehicle miles traveled has absolutely become the state's considered best practice going forward. And when you just think logically about the jobs, where they are being built, as much housing as we can accommodate in the area, it just seems to be a bit of a no-brainer. Now, the people are going to be here regardless. We can go on and on about Prop 13 and how it has incentivized commercial and office retail over housing residential development. But the jobs are coming, and I don't see them stopping anytime soon. So we're going to have to accommodate and create this housing somewhere. And we can figure out then where we want to do it. Circling back to the things that we're doing in the TDM in San Francisco, and these are requirements for developers that they have to meet, but it's certainly things that you can put into your development code as a whole. Some of the ideas, you're ahead of me. Memberships to car share services like Zipcar, it's one of the things that's included, that if a developer wants to provide that as a way to get people out of their cars, they can do that. Muni passes, Caltrain passes. San Francisco recently passed a new law that requires solar panels on all rooftops. You could take the energy obtained from the solar panels to power electric buses, shuttles that would take residents to and from their needed locations. So there's a variety of different ways that we can be incentivizing the developer to do things that will ultimately reach increasing benefits for the entire community that's both currently here right now and the future residents that are going to be able to get to call this place home at one point in time. So I sincerely hope that we think about the big picture with all of this, and I realize that you have a very challenging and long task ahead of you. But however we can facilitate and be helpful, we hope to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jonathan Sharfman.
Madam Mayor and Council, I will reserve my comments until you get to the greenhouse gas emissions portion of the comments. Thank you.
Okay. John Burr. Yes, it says Dr. John Christopher Burr, Esquire, J.D.
Thank you.
I shortened it.
Hello, John Christopher Burr, proud to be a lifelong resident of Brisbane, of course. And, I was thinking about the experts that are parading themselves up with regard to this project, and, I don't think any of them are as qualified as several of us who grew up in this town, like Clark and Michelle and myself, who actually saw what was dumped out there. And, we have personal eyewitness knowledge. And we don't guess, such as some of these people, which I believe there are less than one well per acre out there. And so that's sort of like, I think Randy described it as taking a straw and looking up in the sky and trying to predict the weather. That's how inadequate our information is on this site, as far as the scientific basis. But that's why, because the public here in Brisbane has a good knowledge and they're smart people, that's why it's illegal to have houses out there, because they know it'll forever be toxic. Tuntex, and it is Tuntex, it is the record owner here, UPC. I was in Redwood City the other day and I looked at the records, and there's no UPC on any deeds or anything like that. Universal far beyond. It's ton taxes on the records, so you should know that. And so people, you should run a Google on ton tax and see what you find, because I think you'd be surprised if you look thoroughly at it. Anyway, looking at the only really good scientific opinion that I think has been given here has been from Dr. G. Fred Lee, and he's told you that this will forever be toxic. Toxic forever, forever toxic. That's what you got out there. If I had my way, I would force Tuntex to dig up everything and turn it back into the bay, because in my opinion, it was illegally stolen from the public anyway. Those were navigable waters, and Southern Pacific Railroad stole it from us, and we should get them back. But we shouldn't have to pay for cleaning it up, because we didn't make that mess. Anyway, and I don't think Tuntex is going to, dig up all the toxins that are going to remain out there forever and remove them. Nobody's suggested that. That's the only way it would ever be possibly safe. And like I said, many of us would want it to be bay if we actually dug up the toxins and removed them. Their plan is to leave them there forever. And so, this discussion of putting housing out there, to me, is unbelievably irresponsible, and begging for litigation, and, unbelievably negligent in the sense of what this could have, the kind of impact it could have on pregnant women, small children, and things like that. It's well known that when the state cited this site out here, they used the word teratogen and mutagen in their documentation when they cited this as a state Superfund site, and their substantial endangerment order. And what those words mean is, you got babies that are deformed, that are, have 3 eyes and 4 toes and, 3 arms and things like that. So it's not right that you should even consider putting any housing out there when that's going to remain forever out there. It just boggles the mind how these ignorant people from outside come in here and try to pressure us. And it's also blows my mind that they just want to ignore this ugly fact that we have here to deal with, and just sweep it under the table as if it's not a problem. Unbelievably irresponsible. Reminds me of the Pinto car case, where Ford decided it was better to burn up 350 families than to recall the Pinto car, and fix the gas tank. People should look that up too, as far as corporate decision making goes. Anyway, I have some questions about the transportation section too. Does the transportation mitigation program include details with regard to the necessary dikes that would be needed to compact the projected 30 to 80 feet of sea level rise? Are even any dikes included in there? Did any of you see that when you looked at it? Probably not. Probably not. That's one of those, let's put it off the mitigation till the future sort of thing. Does the circulation element and transportation plan give details, projections, completion dates, scheduling, and most importantly, costs for all these transportation ideas that are being floated around here? And when I looked at these plans in the past, that was sadly missing, and that's one of the reasons it didn't rise to the level of a legal specific plan. You have to have that. Anyway, where are we? And I don't think it's right to burden either the city of Brisbane or its citizens with these kind of costs. The dikes that would be necessary would be outrageously expensive. And trying to do any kind of underground, any kind of contracting out there is a nightmare. I mean, just look at Tunnel Avenue. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. Who wants to deal with that for the next 40 years? So the costs have to be there. And in fact, our law requires that, because back in 1991, when the general plan was being revised, Councilman Waldo, a lawyer who's, has some good sense, put it in our general plan that developers were supposed to pay all these kind of infrastructure costs, not the public. So I hope that you're honoring that in here and that it isn't put off onto the public. Or I know that they're trying to stick the redevelopment agency with these costs, which is a hidden way to gyp the schools and the county and other service providers. Fortunately, that law's been wiped out.
John, can you wrap
But anyway, that's an important thing on the, and let me make one last point about the housing too. If these people were serious about doing anything about housing, first of all, we're not going to get our way out of it with more supply. It's just not going to work, okay? But what we could do is we could require real estate speculators to open their books and put a cap on the amount of profit they're allowed to make when they build these houses. In other words, we could force them to build it and provide it at a cost-effective level that people could afford. We could do that. But nobody talks about that. And of course, we'd have to have rent control too for the renters. But they don't want to talk about that either. So, they just want to have us subsidize housing and just add more projects, more dense packed projects, cheaply made, cheaply constructed, and they only started to maximize the obscene profits that real estate speculators make on housing.
Thank you, John. Sorry about
So lastly, I guess that's enough for now. G. Friendly, the Planning Commission was probably on the right track here too. Last point. I want to emphasize too that and remind you folks that you've promised to put this on the ballot for the public from the beginning, and I hope that you'll honor that so that we don't have to do a referendum on it. I think that's important for you to honor the public's wishes. We voted to keep the housing off there. That was the public who spoke and put that into the law. And I think the citizens of Brisbane are smart enough to realize they made a good decision back in 1991. They'll probably want to continue that. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Greg Anderson?
Hi, I'm Greg Anderson, as you know, and I just wanted to supplement what Lloyd Zola said about the Planning Commission process regarding the recommendation vis-a-vis traffic. Clearly, everything I say is going to be my own thoughts, but it is my unvetted opinion that no one on the Planning Commission will disagree with me. First of all, the mitigation measures. We did not go through the mitigation measures for traffic line by line because the recommendation we made was quite different than the DSP, and we imagine it's possible that what you recommend might be different than what the Planning Commission recommended and what the applicant originally requested. Therefore, it did not seem to make sense to go through that effort until we had a land use determination. Furthermore, the Planning Commission was in agreement with the qualitative results of the traffic study, which is to say that if you have transit-oriented development and you compare it to something that is less transit-oriented, then we would expect that traffic would be greater in the second scenario. We did not agree at all with the qualitative results of the traffic study. Oh, sorry, I said those backwards, sorry, brain. Anyway, the amounts we found to be implausible. But again, we did not recommend further study because the general direction was clear, and it did not seem to be worth the effort or the time to figure out exactly how great the difference was. Just the direction of the vector was significant or sufficient. And also it seemed like there was very little to gain from just doing that effort. However, after listening to Ms. Levin's presentation last night, I now have a different opinion on that,
And I do believe that, based on some of the examples that she's brought forward, I think that there are more studies that could be done to improve the transit-oriented and transit management systems that were proposed in the DSP. And as the applicant has said before, we should become curious about this, and the way we should become curious about this is we should ask the applicant to further study some of the ways, such as those done in other areas, that could improve this project once we have a land use determination. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel Diaz.
Good evening, honorable council members. I'm Joel Diaz. I'm mostly concerned with the potential for gridlock in Brisbane, and I'd really like to try and avoid that for obvious reasons. I'm really concerned about protecting Brisbane and our quality of life, protecting the value of our houses. I feel like if we have a lot of gridlock, it's probably going to devalue the real estate here. And so I think we should try to avoid that. And I'm really thinking that the project that's proposed is really just too big. And a lot of times that's a negotiation tactic. People start out big because they ask more than they really are willing to settle for. That might be the case here. I don't know. But, if we're talking about significant unavoidable impacts and exceeding levels of service for our roads and our transportation systems, it might be a good idea to think about scaling back the project. And I know we can talk about levels of service D and F and E and what do these mean? And maybe some cities are okay with that. Maybe their infrastructure is different. Maybe their systems are different. But I think we need a visual on that. What is this magnitude? What does 10,000 trips look like coming out of the Baylands? And in conjunction with all the other trips that are going to come from these new developments that are happening to the north of us. And from my reference point, I kind of look at Candlestick and the 49er game. And they have about 15,000 parking spaces there, 15,000 cars. And we kind of know what that looks like. We know that what the 101 looks like. It gets bumper to bumper. We know what that kind of congestion looks like. And that's kind of a similar magnitude. 10,000 trips, 15,000 cars at Candlestick. It's a similar magnitude. And we would have that every single day of our lives with the other traffic from these other developments. And it could be real severe, tremendous gridlock. So I would think about scaling it way down and trying to avoid these scenarios. In terms of requiring the developer to petition other cities to accept their improvements, I think that's mandatory. If the developer can't get the cities to accept these improvements, then they have to scale the development down. It's not then we'll just accept your development. We have to incentivize the developer to work a deal with these other cities to improve these their portions of the intersections that are going to be impacted. We talked about Hong Kong and Japan, and I've been to Hong Kong. I have friends that live there. My wife lived in Tokyo, and they have great intermodal transit systems, and it's a necessity there. But I really don't I like visiting those places, but I really don't want Brisbane to be like Hong Kong or Tokyo. I like it the way it is, green and open and resources. And I think we should try to avoid that outcome. And so when we talk about the chicken and egg scenario, it's a paradox. And I don't think it's a really good analogy for this. It's really about life and what kind of life do we want, And do we really want to build this congestion and then we necessitate the intermodal transit system? I don't think we want to do that. I think we want to talk about what's fair for Brisbane, what's fair for our citizens, what's fair for the population here. I think we have to abide by the rules, the fairness, and the standards. And I think the rules are the local agency gets to dictate what happens. It's about what's fair to the community. And the standards, and I think we're talking about the standards, and it seems like we're exceeding the standards, and there are significant unavoidable impacts, and that's a problem. And it's not our doing, it's the proposal is creating this situation. I think that's about all I have to say. I did want to talk about the 5% internal capture of trips. I don't think that applies because of the phasing of the construction, because the east side phase may never happen. So to speculate that somehow we're going to recapture a bunch of internal trips, I don't think that holds water. Also, if the interchange, Geneva interchange, is triggered by the east side development and the east side development never happens, then the interchange may not take place. The housing is where the developer makes all the money. That's where you have all the leverage. So if you were going to allow housing, and I'm not saying you should, I don't think you should, all improvements, all money should be tied to the granting of those use rights, not the east side. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further slips on this issue. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the transportation issue? I'll give you 2 minutes since you've spoken already.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief this time. I think it's important to think about consultants for a second, too. I know there was one consultant that some of the people around here referred to as a biostitute, because he falsely claimed to be an expert in areas where he was legally incompetent, including transportation. He had no expertise in that area at all, but he marketed himself as if he was some kind of expert in these kinds of impacts. Basically, I think you can consider consultants are people that their opinions are for sale, and they have little or no, often have little or no compunction about falsely presenting something that's like a post hoc rationalization for a decision that's already been made, for example. And I think it's even more importantly, right over here in Hunters Point, the consultants out here, you know, that's a site that's been polluted heavily with radioactivity because of the nuclear program out there with our Navy. And of course, we know the Navy never was careless and threw any of that in the municipal waste stream, which ended up in our dump, right? Okay. I'm being facetious and sarcastic here. You can bet that quite a bit of nuclear radioactive waste ended up here because they were sloppy back then. But anyway, what they've shown recently is that these consultants out there committed both state and federal crimes, and that they phonied up all their test data in like something like 350 different occasions, separate occasions. Each one of those is a separate federal or state felony. And here they're willing to risk that. Why? Because they were trying to push the housing on these polluted sites that were just filthy with radioactivity. Also, that's where they wanted to push the children's parks. They wanted these sites. Very interesting. So consultants, you know, you got to be very careful with consultants. Like I said earlier, Chief Federley is a good consultant. Now, I think also, if we look at how well the EIR process is done around here locally, and how good these consultants have been with their models, is just to look out your window. I looked out my window today, and it was gridlock. It was stop and go right here in front of Brisbane at 3 o'clock. I can remember when I used to be able to get downtown San Francisco in 10 minutes. Those days are long past, because why? Is that everybody's been building all these projects, and they're not doing proper mitigation, and they're not doing good transportation planning, and we're stuck with this mess. I don't think you should add to it. Finally, I think if we wanted to do anything valuable, at all with regard to transit, we ought to be insisting on light rail up and down Mission Street, and having that be the gateway or whatever that. The Grand Avenue Dream thing, or whatever it is they call it. And that would make sense, because that would just be rebuilding what we used to have. We had a system at one time that went from the top of the hill Daly City to Redwood City, and it was a nice system. But
Thank you, John.
through bad things, you know, that's what we ought to be doing, okay?
Thank you. I think we're going to have to move on now.
Yeah,
Thank
so be
you.
careful with these consultants, you know, they're not very good.
Can I propose a 5-minute break, please,
Absolutely.
before we go to the next
5 minutes.
topic?
Thank you.
Well, part of it, it's all done by motors, separate motors. There's a couple of different, one is deposition, the inside people later. It should be a lot more. Anyway, if you like the movie, you can see it. It's a life size stuff like that. Oh, okay. Really fascinating. Because of who you are. It's like, that's not that far from when they get bored and stuff. Just go buy it.
Is everybody ready? All right, we're going to get started again. If everyone could please take their seats.
We unilaterally knows where stars were all over the town, and the nose were lit up where San Francisco wanted to know what no meant. It meant no more garbage.
We're ready.
But the idea is that without the money from the garbage, it couldn't be formulated in the town.
Okay, I'm just going to use the gavel.
A town that has its
All right.
birth in garbage, I fear, has
Everyone, please take your seats. We're going to start up again. Thank you. Okay. So we're still in the middle of the traffic, noise, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and related policies issue. At this point, we may continue this item to another date since there is quite a bit of topics left and we still have other things on our agenda that we need to cover tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to staff to discuss alternate dates.
Sure. So given the late hour, and you do have one other item you have to finish tonight, the thought was that you would move the remainder of tonight's meeting topics to your next regular meeting, which would be the February 16th on the Baylands hearing schedule, and then create another meeting on February 21st when we would do what was originally scheduled for the 16th.
Does that work for everyone's schedules? That's Tuesday, February 21st.
So we have a Baylands meeting on the 16th.
You do.
Different subject matter.
Correct.
And then
We'd keep that.
And then, okay, and stick with that.
We'd keep the date.
You'll
change
keep the date,
topic.
but we'll move that topic to the 21st so that you have
Continuity.
continuity.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll take up the new topic on the 21st.
Correct.
And so that would be an additional day.
So we still have this Tuesday thing messed me up on my schedule. So our next regular meeting is February 2nd,
Correct.
and that will remain a regular meeting.
Correct.
And then we'll do a February 16th and the 21st.
Correct.
So 16th is Baylands and 21st is normal?
No.
Both would be Baylands.
But rather than starting a new topic on the 16th, we would continue this topic and then have the next topic on the 21st.
So how much time would that be in between? How many days in?
5 days.
Well, no, obviously the reports would come out before then, and you would use the time between now and then to
start studying for that.
Prepare for the next topic, because we've already done the preparation for this meeting. It's more about hearing public comment and asking questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay.
So we don't then do we need a study session on the 16th? No, right?
I don't
Because
believe so,
we
unless
already-
any council members want to.
I don't feel like it's necessary.
I don't believe it's necessary. If any of us have questions, we can always ask the consultants one-on-one.
It makes it very difficult if we're trying to have, an hour and a half study session before we have a 4-hour meeting.
Right.
Or
Okay, but we would have a study session on the 21st, because it would be a new topic. Okay? All right, so
6 p.m.
Like I said, it makes it
6 p.m. on the 21st.
those kind of hours.
I'm sorry.
I think we should put study sessions back on the agenda as a discussion between us now that we've done a couple, just to kind of like talk about them a little bit.
Okay, well, can we add that to the second?
We could put that on the February 2nd agenda.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not going to be here, so can I I'm not going to be here.
March 2nd,
But,
March 3rd.
but I can send, I could write a letter to you,
And I will advocate on your behalf.
and then you could I don't know how that is Brown Act. Can you give it to them at the time or no? Like, is there a way I could give input on that topic?
Let me talk with Michael. I'm sure there's got to be some way that would be acceptable.
Well, even if it's only that to say you're not available starting at 6 a.m. or at whatever.
I'm not available at 6 a.m. No.
6 p.m. Sorry.
Is it February 21st? Are we going to have a study session? Or?
Well, I think that's Madison's point.
We could put it on for then
as a
if you want.
placeholder.
We could put it on another meeting after that. I just think we should rediscuss it. When if it doesn't have to be before that one.
Well, we could put it on the February 2nd agenda for discussion, and then we'll tentatively schedule the 21st to have a study session. And
Right.
if you provide a different direction on the 2nd, then we'll do that.
So, but you'll contact me to
I
discuss
will.
how I can. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Cool.
All right, and I want to thank everyone who came out to talk on those other topics, and apologize. We appreciate you waiting through all of this. Hopefully you found it informative as well, and we hope that you'll come to the meeting on the 16th and give the public comment that you wanted to give tonight. So, unless there's anything else on this topic, we're going to move on to item 5, Mayor Council Matters, discuss City Selection Committee appointment.
Did you get that, Bill? No, I mean, you look confused.
So come back on the 16th.
Because we're gonna pick up on
and the
emission
21st.
and all noise, and we're gonna
We'll
pick that up
on
then.
noise, air quality, greenhouse gases, emissions, and related policy issues. So
So thank you to everyone who came out tonight. So
But you're welcome to stay if you want to stay. You know.
So, as I said, we're moving on to discuss City Selection Committee appointments. Staff report, please.
I don't think.
Or
I have no
is-
staff
I mean-
report. This is just your
Okay.
decisions.
All right, then I will go with this. So
vote on.
we are having the Council of Cities City Selection Committee meeting this Friday. I will be in attendance as the mayor, and we need to vote on several items. Okay, so first one is selection of one council member to serve as an alternate on ABAG representing cities, fulfilling Millbrae Councilmember Wayne Lee's remaining term through June 30th, 2017. The two people seeking appointment are Carlos Romero from East Palo Alto and Catherine Mahampour from Foster City. They're both seeking appointment and have submitted letters.
I read both. I'm not very familiar with either. I've spoken with Catherine Manipur on, I think she's on the bike ped, and interviewed with CCAG. But looking at the resumes, I would recommend Carlos Romero. He looks very, very qualified and has a lot of experience on some of the subcommittees, and I would make that recommendation.
I'll second that.
I don't know Catherine, but I do know Carlos, and well, he's a sharp guy. But he was appointed. I always questioned his commitment. He did one term and then quit, and now he's reappointed to the council. But I can go for that for sure. But I leave it up to the mayor to who you want to vote for.
Okay. Madison, do you have any questions?
I don't feel strongly either way, so I don't have a relationship with either of them. So I'm willing to instill trust in you, since you guys have more of it, more interactions with them.
Okay, sure. So I've interacted with both of them just a little bit at the Council of Cities meetings, and I agree with Terry that Carlos Romero's letter sounded like he had more appropriate, relevant experience. So my preference is to go with him as well. So we'll go with Carlos Romero. And then the second one is selection of one council member to serve on the Housing Endowment and Regional Trust, HART Board, representing cities, all cities except Daly City are eligible, for a term of 3 years beginning March 1st, 2017 through February 29th, 2020. Mayor Charlie Bronitsky from Foster City is seeking appointment, and council member Diane Howard from Redwood City is seeking reappointment.
Cliff, you're on the hard.
Yeah, I would go with Diane Howard. I've worked with her on the hard board. She's very committed to the affordable housing issues that the county faces. She always brings good input to the meetings. She's an excellent board member, so I think we should go with her.
I've known
Okay.
Diane for a long time. Actually, we served together on what was the First Alliance Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance Board. I was the first chair, and then Diane was the second chair.
All right.
And, I've known her for many years, and I always found her very thorough.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very public oriented. So yeah, I would say. I don't know Charlie, so.
Okay. All right.
All right.
And
That's
let's
it.
go with Diane.
it.
And then if there are any, as there were in the last meeting, there were some nominations from the floor. Do you want to give the mayor discretion?
Of course.
Okay.
I nominate Madison.
There you go.
Will anyone else be in attendance this Friday? No? Okay. I will do the
Do
honor.
that to me, Clark.
Okay. And moving on to written communications, I want to acknowledge receipt of the written communications regarding the Brisbane Baylands. Oh, it's right in front of me. We received between December 15th, 2016 and January 24th, 2017, 4 communications: Adina Levin, Friends of Caltrain; Anka Enti; Istan Nijam; and Todd David. Finally, we're going to adjourn and close in memory of Louise Bussey, who will be missed.
Yes.
So moved.
All right.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.